It's great to be with you and welcome everybody. I can't tell you how much it means to me, Eileen, for you to extend this invitation. What I love about it, it's bringing me back to my roots in patient safety. As you'll hear in just a couple of minutes, there's a whole nother aspect of patient safety that we have to think about. And I'm so really pleased to be with a group of patient advocates that are out there helping people and families navigate through a really complex system. So I'm going to share my screen now. So this is a topic that I knew nothing about until 6 years ago. And I was looking to write another book that was important for all of us who are interested in good health care. And I stumbled on this subject. So I'm going to share with you part of this journey. And it really has been a journey of learning. And I really look forward to hearing your comments, your questions. And so we all teach, all learn tonight. The topic is what's in your medicine cabinet and tips on taking charge of your medicine. You know, today in the age of Amazon, when people have packages delivered right to their home, we don't really think much about where they come from, where they're made, and how they get here. And the same is true with our medicines. When I was growing up in suburban New York, there were a number of well-known brand name drug companies that dominated, the drugs that we took. But now medicine making has gone global. And what I'll be talking about today are the generic drugs. And generics, which I didn't know until a couple of years ago, they're most of the drugs that are prescribed. 90% of prescriptions today are generics. So I'll be talking about those today. So millions of Americans are taking prescription drugs, probably a lot of unnecessary ones. And the work of Take Charge to help people manage their medications is so important. So tonight we'll be talking about another dimension of managing our medicines. So here's a couple questions for you, just to get us started. Have you ever taken a generic drug and thought it wasn't working as usual? Have you ever gotten a refill for the same medicine and dosage and the pills look different? Have you ever tried to get a prescription filled and was told that it was on back order or in shortage? What's going on here? In patient safety work, we always start with a story and we learn lessons from it. So I'm going to start today with a story of a physician, Dr. Bob Allen. He's a Johns Hopkins trained physician, and he had a thriving radiology practice in Arizona. And here's a picture of Dr. Allen with his son, Joshua. They were out hiking in the desert. And I met this family when I was working on this book, China RX, and it's an incredibly compelling story. Dr. Allen is a healthy 45-year-old gentleman. He was hiking in the mountains with his wife a few weeks before he went into the Mayo Clinic's emergency room late at night one night. He knew he had a stomach ulcer and it was really painful. So he walked in, and being a physician, they said to him, well, why don't you just spend the night and have your wife and children go home? They were with him when they went, and just have him come up back tomorrow. And in the meantime, we'll stay the night and we'll scope you in the morning. So that seemed like a good plan. Early the next morning, Dr. Allen received heparin at 6 o'clock in the morning, according to the medical records. He got another dose around 10:30 that morning. And this was in December 2007. Shortly thereafter, he didn't feel anything, but the signs showing that he was having a heart attack. He was rushed into the cath lab and was given multiple doses, large doses of heparin. Within a few hours, his heart was failing and he was in multiple organ failure. This was inexplicable to the doctors caring for him and to his wife, who asked, are you sure you have the right person? A week later, Dr. Allen had his heart removed and he was placed on an artificial heart machine about the size of a refrigerator, small refrigerator, and was attached to it by a 3-foot cord. The following month, when he was in his hospital bed at Mayo Clinic with his wife sitting next to him, he was waiting a transplant as a Hail Mary. He and his wife were watching the news one night. And on it, he saw a report that in St. Louis, contaminated heparin was discovered at a children's hospital there. He turned to his wife and said, "Oh my God, I got a lot of heparin. Was it contaminated?" To make a long story short, there were more than 200 Americans who died from contaminated heparin that was reported to the FDA. At least they were linked to deaths. There are no autopsies done in cases like this. And the number of people harmed is completely unknown, and even the number of deaths is unknown. What happened was, and this was a hearing held on Capitol Hill about this contaminated heparin. What happened was, and the FDA found the link to one of the products that was sold and widely used in hospitals and in kidney dialysis centers, that there was a contaminant that was put into the manufacturing process at a plant in China that was making the key ingredient for heparin. And this was done for economic reasons because it was cheaper. They put in a fake substitute. And they sold this product to Baxter Healthcare, who then in turn made the finished drug at a Cherry Hill, New Jersey plant and sold it to American hospitals and dialysis centers. And this contaminant was lethal in high doses. And that's what happened to Dr. Allen. After a very brave battle, 3 months, and a Hail Mary heart transplant, he just never made it. And his wife, fortunately, is a physician. And it was only because she's a physician that she was able to tell the story in great detail. It's outlined in Chapter 1 of China RX. And it highlights the real challenges we have in assuring that our medicines are safe. So that wasn't in 2007 and 2008. What about today? A decade later. Beginning in 2018, millions of Americans had their blood pressure medicines recalled because carcinogens were found in them. You've all heard of the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, and they oversee not just approvals of new drugs. It's something I didn't really know until working on this subject, that they also inspect the manufacturing facilities where our drugs are made. And those inspections are conducted by very well-trained people in terms of quality processes. And manufacturers have to abide by very specific specifications. If you think about it, every pill, every vial has to be made the right way because we're ingesting it and betting our lives on it. So what about this recall? It was widely reported in the media. Millions of Americans, and people not just here, but in more than 20 countries, had gotten their medicines recalled. And in many ways, the media downplayed it. Here, FDA recalls some valsartan, that's a type of blood pressure medicine, a generic, due to impurity. Well, this impurity was a carcinogen. And it turns out this contamination was going on for years. And we learned this not from the US press, but from European trade industry press. It was going on for at least 4 years and perhaps 6 years, according to German publications. Now, was there any need to worry? Now, a lot of people were told, oh, not to worry about this. The amount of carcinogen called NDMA, and I'm not sure what that stands for, they said not to worry, this occurs naturally in small amounts in water and in food like bacon. So nothing to worry about here. What we learned when the FDA finally got into inspecting the manufacturing facilities and testing these blood pressure medicines, according to FDA data, the amount of carcinogen in the product produced at a plant in China had more than 200 times the acceptable limit per pill of this carcinogen, far higher than any other manufacturer. And the FDA banned everything from this plant. And just so you know, this is evidence-based. This is a screenshot here of, this is FDA data, laboratory analysis at the bottom, see at the bottom, valsartan products. Note the variation. These are the different manufacturers. So with our generic drugs, you have a number of different manufacturers on the left-hand column. And over in the right-hand column here is the amount of this NDMA. And this company here, Princeton Pharmaceuticals, it's actually the name of a Chinese subsidiary located in New Jersey, Prinston. And this is the company that sold the contaminated product here in the United States that had more than 200 times the acceptable limit. These are statements from the FDA. NDMA is a chemical in a class called genotoxic impurities. These chemicals are a special concern because unlike most impurities in drugs, they have the potential to cause harm at very low levels. The FDA wrote a letter to the company after inspecting its manufacturing plant, and this is pretty stern language for the FDA. FDA has grave concerns about the potential presence of mutagenic impurities in all products. They call them intermediates and API. We can get into that later if you want to know those definitions, but these are the ingredients in the blood pressure medicines at your facilities. So there was this huge recall nationwide and around the world. And as a consequence, there were shortages. I spoke to a very senior official in the federal government, and he said he was waiting 3 months to get a blood pressure medicine. So we're seeing shortages of products when we have these quality problems. This is a document from the Food and Drug Administration. You can see it here on the left-hand side. And this is the date when they inspected the plant. This is all public information, although some of it's hard to get to. And this is the name of the location of the plant that they inspected. And this inspection report was pretty devastating. So how did the carcinogens get into our medicines? That story is told in this journal, and I'm just putting this up here to let you know this is very well documented, and about how valsartan contamination, context, and implications. I spoke to the gentleman who wrote this article. I happened to meet him at an event in New Jersey, and he spent a lot of time in China, and he knew this manufacturer. And here's the backstory, which you'll never hear about anywhere else but in China RX. So here's what happened. This particular blood pressure medicine was under patent, meaning it was made by a brand name company. And so it had exclusive rights to sell it. But then it came off patent and could be sold as a generic, a cheaper alternative to the branded product. And when that happens, a lot of companies around the world, they compete to make our generic drugs because they want to get the big market share. They want to get the most money. And so this company in China wanted to make it cheaper. They wanted to improve the efficiency of how they make it. They want to make it faster and cheaper. So they went to a group of chemistry whiz students at a nearby university near their manufacturing plant and asked them, can you help us make this more efficiently? And they came up with great chemistry. But what happened is nobody considered whether this great chemistry was safe for human consumption. These were just chemists, not pharmaceutical chemists. And so it turns out the new process that they came up with, the consequence is it gave off carcinogens. And this NDMA is a chemical found in rocket fuel. And this was going on for at least 4 years. And somehow it's unclear how it was identified. It seems very likely that a company in Europe was testing this drug and noticed it and notified the FDA and the company. And that's when the story broke. In other words, it happened by chance. The FDA does not routinely test our drugs to ensure that they're safe and they're made the way they're supposed to be. So that's the backstory on how this happened. And this author, who works in plants in China and everywhere else around the world, has said it's probably not just this drug. There are probably others that have this problem, but the FDA just doesn't catch it. This is a quote from Dr. Margaret Hamburg, who she was a former FDA commissioner, and she gave a speech, and she is quoted at this meeting in 2011. I think people have no idea in this country about the vulnerability of things that we count on every day, including drugs. We have a system that has gaps in our protective mechanisms, and it's a growing problem. How did we get here? I remember the day when our drugs were made here in the US fully. It was like the industrial equivalent of home cooking. So what happened at one time, the US, Europe, Japan used to make end-to-end our medicines, all the ingredients and the finished drugs, and sold them to the world. And by 2015, and actually a lot earlier, the tables had turned. And China, it controls most of the ingredients and the chemicals to make generic drugs and even brand name drugs. How did this happen? Well, there was bipartisan support in the federal government for generic drugs, and that happened in 1984. And this allowed patented drugs, when their patent ran out, that companies could compete and sell them at a lower cost. And so that means they needed a cheaper place to make them. And so they looked to Asia. Well, what's happened in the process is that these life and death medicines that people bet their lives on are made right. They've become commodities. They're bought and sold like t-shirts. So very large companies, some of them are Fortune 10 companies, they will scour the world with algorithms. And if they can find a product that's 2 cents cheaper per pill, they'll go with that one. And they don't go in and inspect the plants. They rely on FDA. And yet the manufacturers are supposed to be accountable. And the buyers, you would think should be also, but they're not. Because somebody bought these huge amounts of these blood pressure medicines and sold them in the US. US companies did that, but nobody was checking. Another discovery in doing this work is we can't make penicillin anymore in the US. In fact, we can't make any antibiotic. We can't make the antibiotics you give to your children or grandchildren for ear infections. We can't make the antibiotics for bronchitis or pneumonia or STDs or UTIs or even sepsis. So we're dependent on others for something as important as antibiotics. We can't make vitamin C. The last plant here closed in 2014. We can't make aspirin. All of that went to a single country, China, and the whole world depends on this. During the COVID pandemic, Europe suffered a shortage of acetaminophen because they were all getting it from the same country, and demand just spiked during a pandemic. So how come we don't make penicillin anymore and other antibiotics? And this is just to show you that this is really a data-driven, evidence-based documentation here. And I'm going to show you a little slide that's has a lot of moving parts, but the concept is really simple. With this slide, this is just to show you that this is a document that came from European manufacturers. And they were really helpful to me when I was working on the China RX book. Very public-spirited, frankly, more so than the US industry. And these are a group of companies that make the ingredients in medicines. And I'm going to show you this slide, and it's about what I call the penicillin cartel. And this is why we don't make things anymore. This is a slide of global penicillin production, the material. Remember, our antibiotics, they're made in these giant fermentation tanks. And we used to have them all over the country. And this is from the dates from late 80s to like mid 2000s, right here at the bottom. And these bars, they represent the growth in global production. Now, a country like China made a really smart move. They invested heavily in having antibiotic industrial plants because they have more than 1 billion people. And so this is their line here. They started having an increasing share of global product. But I want to draw your attention to this yellow line here. I said the last penicillin plant announced it was closing in 2004. It was up in Syracuse, New York. Look what happened here in 2004. And according to industry leaders, China dumped the product on the global market at a very cheap price. And that drove out the US and even Indian producers of penicillin. So a country like India, they were just undercut on price. So with more than 1 billion people, and today they have COVID-19 and perhaps secondary bacterial infections, they can't make antibiotics either. So our antibiotic production is so centralized, and the price was kept low for a number of years until US business, Indian business, and other plants closed, and then what happened? The price went up. These are illegal trade practices. If US companies did this, they could be prosecuted. But nothing happened. So who makes our generics? China makes about 10% of our generic drugs, and in a couple minutes I'll show you some labels of examples. India makes 25% of our generic drugs, but it depends on China for the key ingredients. And right now there was just an article in a newspaper about cargo flights from China to India have been suspended. So India is worried about whether it'll have the material it needs to make generic drugs to treat COVID patients who are hospitalized. So in addition to antibiotics, the US, we can't make thousands of generic drugs anymore because we don't make the ingredients. We can't even make the drugs to care for people who are hospitalized with coronavirus to treat them and help them recover, like sedatives for people on ventilators, epinephrine, and of course antibiotics. It was really shocking. And meanwhile, you have 100 countries competing for the same product. So we had a lot of shortages and rationing during COVID, but that was sort of kept off the radar. So these are just some drugs where our generics are coming from now. This is an Alzheimer's medicine made in China. The antibiotic doxycycline, it's used for acne, for anthrax exposure, and other uses. Antidepressants, chemotherapies, HIV/AIDS drugs. So we're seeing the ramp up. And meanwhile, our companies have basically collapsed. We can hardly make anything here in the US. And this was the pharma industry trade press. They can't live without ingredients from a single country. So you have global, sourcing of this from a single country. Now, we wouldn't do that for oil. We wouldn't have all the oil coming from one country or all the wheat or corn, because medicines are things you need to survive. So what do you do when we have quality problems with our drugs? And I'll share with you some of the things that I have been hearing from patients. I got an email from a woman whose daughter couldn't get a very important seizure medicine. And another sister who was taking care of her brother, who's in about his 60s, and he got a generic drug also for seizures that it was a different manufacturer of a generic. And he started having seizures again. And I'll show you in a few minutes about the quality of some of our drugs. In fact, let me jump to this right now. This is data from an online pharmacy based in New Haven, Connecticut, called Valisure. And they started a couple of years ago. And what this is lisinopril. Lisinopril is a common blood pressure medicine. I'm going to go through this really carefully. And they were gracious enough to share these slides. So down at the bottom here, this is this online pharmacy is the only pharmacy in the world that tests every batch of a drug before they sell it. Nobody else does that. FDA doesn't do it, and who knows if manufacturers do it. I hope the brand name companies do it. So here's the branded version of lisinopril. And here's generic 1, generic 2, another generic manufacturer, another one, and a fifth one. These are all different generic product, same lisinopril, but made by different companies. Over here is something that's really important. What makes a medicine is called the active ingredient, active pharmaceutical ingredient, or API. And these are specifications that companies have to document to get approval from the FDA to make product. And you've got to make them right. So this is where at 100%, it should have 100% of the active ingredient. It should be what it should be. And what this company does, it tests 3 batches from each manufacturer. And look at this. This is the branded product here. They tested 3 batches, and one came at 100%, another a little higher, and another a little higher, but not terrible. Look at generic number 1. It had more than 100% consistently in their 3 batches. Here's generic number 2. This one was sort of all over the map. This one batch got it right. This one was less. This one was more. Here's another one. And this one never met 100%. This a 4th product. And look at this 5th generic of lisinopril, of this blood pressure medicine. Look at the variation in the amount of active ingredient from about 94% all the way up to 109%. So you can go to the drugstore and get your prescription refilled. One time you might get it at this level API, another here, and another here. That's just unthinkable. Now this is another important medication that's called lamotrigine, and it's used for seizures. And this is a very complicated slide, but all I'm going to say here is that if you're taking a medication for epilepsy, for seizures, you want to make sure that if you take the pill, and you're supposed to take it, say, every 8 hours or every 6 hours, you want to make sure that you're getting a consistent amount of medicine so that you're protected evenly across the 6 hours. So it has to be made to dissolve in the body correctly. The dissolution here for so many of these generic drugs was so bad that many patients they would get a higher dose and then they would be unprotected. And they had multiple generic drugs here tested. So this was such a poorly made product. And this company, Valisure, went to these manufacturers and say, hey, you've got a problem. But nobody fixes it. And it's down here, this was reported by folks at Harvard, that this could be deadly for people. Because the products are not dissolving properly in the body and giving you the protection that you think that you're getting. That's the state of our generic drugs. And Valisure has found that more than 10% of the generic drugs it tests do not meet standard. They don't dissolve in the body properly, or as here, they didn't have the right amount of active ingredient, or sometimes they have contaminants that shouldn't be there. Some of you might have heard about Zantac or ranitidine that was taken off the market globally. It was found to cause carcinogens buildup in the body. It was this group that discovered it. They reported to the FDA, and the FDA just blew them off. But other countries started recalling it, and even the branded product withdrew the product. And then after that, only then did the FDA act, and it's now off the market. This is what's happening to our medicine supply. You know, when I was working on the China RX book, I met people who worked in these manufacturing plants here and elsewhere around the world. And there was this dedication, there was this ethic. What we're seeing here is absolutely unthinkable to those folks. So I'm going to go back to what we can do, what you can do. The first is to learn about where your medicines come from. If you notice that your generic drug doesn't seem to be working as you're used to it working, tell your doctor. Maybe you got, as one pharmaceutical executive told me, a bad batch. We've seen from that data, a bunch of companies have bad batches too often. If you were recently switched to the same drug and dose, but the pill looks different, it may be made by a different manufacturer. That manufacturer might have different fillers and other ingredients that you might have a reaction to. If you feel something is different, you have concerns about how it's working, tell your doctor. So how can you learn more about who's making your drug and where it's made? So when you go to the pharmacy, ask the pharmacist to show you the box it comes in. And take a picture of the box with a company name on it. The company name on it might be the manufacturer, but the FDA really makes it so non-transparent. It might be the name of a distributor or repackager. But then when you get home, call up the company and ask them, where was it made? Some companies will tell you, but others won't. Now, if you don't get your medicines at a retail pharmacy in person, you can go to this website. This is a website called Daily Med. Daily Med, just type it in a search engine. And this website is hosted by the National Institutes of Health. And here you can see there's a search box. And here's where you type in the name of your drug. So to show you an example, I typed in the name of a drug, Leviness, which is a birth control pill. And I'll show you the screen, and that screen shows the first two of multiple manufacturers or distributors. So I typed in the name of the drug here, in this little search box, and here's the results that come up on Daily Med. Here's one made by North Star RX, and this is a repackager. And so what you do over here on the left-hand side of this red circle is a picture of you can find the label. And the label might tell you or might not where it's made. In this case, when I clicked on this label, here's what I found. Now the print is really small, so you won't be able to see where it's made, but this will tell you that even though it has a Western sounding name, North Star RX, it's actually made by a company based in China. There was another company based in China that had birth control pills that it was selling, and the FDA issued a very significant recall, and so did European regulators. So this information, you can find out where your drugs are made, or at least the name of a distributor or packager, and if you call them up, you can ask them, so where's my product made? I had a tooth infection a couple years ago, and of course I was in the middle of doing all this, and I went to the local CVS, and as they were filling the prescription, I wanted to know where it was made. And she said it came from a good place. And I said, well, where's that? Show me the box. And it was made by Sandoz. Sandoz is a European company, and this is a derivative of penicillin, and I know that they have a penicillin plant in Austria. So I felt confident about the drug that I was taking. So what else can you do? I have no financial interest in Valisure, the online pharmacy, but they are an online pharmacy. As mentioned, they're the only pharmacy that tests every batch before selling it. To me, this should be standard. And then if you order from them, they'll send you the test results. They'll tell you here about the active ingredient, about over here, any contaminants. This is just a sample of what you might get. They'll tell you if what its dissolution is, and it's actually signed by a human being. This is the standard that we should come to expect for every single company that's selling us drugs. So we went through those 2 case studies. And as we know, patient safety has so many different dimensions. This is just one of them. And we never give up. We have to help ourselves, our families, the people we care about, and you as patient advocates, helping people when they're in the middle of a situation. This is just another factor to think about. This is the first book, Wall of Silence, where I met Eileen. And here we are. This was about 17 years later, China RX. This took 3 years of research. It has 900 footnotes. It's so important to be documented correctly. I've been asked to testify before Congress several times and to brief very senior levels, people in Congress, the administration, and industry. So I want to thank you. I really look forward to a robust dialogue with you, your comments, your questions, your experiences, and we'll all learn together.